gas, my whole crew I help with. I want mine in cash, want it all, I'm selfish. Never gave a fuck, I'm bad, I cannot help this. Caught up in my ways, counting days till I'm fucking out this. Whoa, roll up 20 deep, little homie, build a snap. Like, whoa, put 100 down and put us on the map. Like, whoa, y'all ain't even know the place I had to go. In my soul, lost a part of me, but I won't lose control.
Hi guys, we're back here in Gamer Nation, our gaming global podcast, where obviously I bring the journeys and adventures and lessons by professionals in our mobile gaming world. And here I'm very pleased to have back on the show, our friend and our world-class coach, Hippo. How's it going, man?
Oh, how about you?
Doing good. I'm doing good. I must confess I had some days after Atlanta, right? It was exhausting to cast all that marathon in some 3 days, but it was awesome. But anyways, have been having some days, some nice days to rest, but also always on track, like I told you. So yeah, and also walking to the end of the year, right? So as you know, our mental energy is never the same, but we do the best we can.
Yeah, winter is coming.
Winter's coming, yeah. In my city, winter was already here in some days, and then it switched back to the summer. I don't know why, but yeah, it's a transitional season, let's say it this way.
Yeah.
But I've been doing good, doing a lot of stuff in COD and other games as well. What about yourself, man? Have you been taking like off days from the game or doing stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I've been, right after Atlanta, I've also kind of just been off in terms of coaching itself. However, let's just say that I've been involved with a lot of conversations with regards to what the future of I suppose, whether it be where I would be coaching at, if I'm going to be coaching at all, and otherwise, So I think there's been a lot of discussions that I've been having with a lot of people. So still a lot of talking. I'm a professional yapper, as people put it. That's kind of my job. But still, got to keep pushing forward. So,
of course, and I'll say like, other than like a yapper, like you're a thinker of the game. So I mean, usually people who think and have regional authentic ideas like to also put it out, right? So that's why you are actually our first guest to be back here for the first time. So you're the first one to be on a second chance, on a second run here with us. So I'm very happy to have you here. Many of our friends are gonna be getting to the chat, so you guys who are listening to us, please, hit the like button and stay with us, and also bring questions to the discussion, because we're gonna be talking basically, I would say, about the World Finals, who were very interesting on DreamHack Atlanta some weeks ago, with I would say in a way the surprising championship by Garena's Elevate to some people, some other kids see that coming. We're going to be talking about all that, and also I would say the off-season, because the off-season usually on COD, in some occasions, some regions at least, like it's a long period, it's a long winter, to be fair, right? So it's going to be kind of a long time from now to the end of January, and potentially talking about Coach Hippo's future. Let's approach all these major, let's say, topics here, and I'm happy to have Exile on the Gamer Nation chat, and also Guilherme, my friend from Brazil. Please, guys, be welcome. Hippo, so first things first, what did you feel about the event? I don't know, obviously you have been to the World Finals back in 2023. Would you compare these two events? What did you feel this time?
Yeah, so I mean, we were back in Atlanta, and the venue, just like last time, was amazing, but it was even better, honestly, than it was before, as everything was set up in a way where it was a lot more, I think the format was a bit more clean. It was easier to figure out in terms of where you had to navigate as well to a certain degree. I think that the players in general had a better time as well in terms of making sure that they were all seated in, good gaming chairs, unlike last year where the main stage for some reason didn't have gaming chairs. So I think that was a massive plus as well. I think that as a whole, the design of everything was also a lot better for the most part. And so all in all, I think the experience itself was great. I think I saw actually more people compared to last year as well, which was good to see. And so I think at the end of the day, right, we can't say that everything was perfect, right? I mean, we still had certain, mishaps in terms of, how sometimes the players' face cams did not necessarily match with their names, etc., and things like that. But it's not easy to run all this. People who don't get to see production from behind the stage, you guys don't know like how hard it is, the amount of screens and everything that they have to look at, and the technical stuff is so tough. And so for them to still have managed to run the event at the level that they did, I really have to commend ESL for that, the ESL FACEIT group.
Yeah, totally. So I'm with you on this, and I would say I could see a little bit of this backstage challenge all in all during the days, because I was also streaming from there, so I had the chance of using a spot at the Creators Hub, which was fantastic. A lot of creators and influencers, people reacting. Most of my friends from the NA region were like reacting and watch partying. Obviously, we had the official casters on stage, so it was it was a bunch of people. It was a lot of machinery, but it was awesome. Everything was figured out at the last moments, and of course during the days. It was very cool experience, I would say, interpersonally. Like you said, meeting people, in person. It was the first time you and I met, I guess. In person was so cool. and I'm terribly sorry that I just had to jump into the next appointment. But like, we tried our best, folks, to talk in the hotel. One of the things I most liked, Hippo, was that obviously since they put the the arena very close to the hotel lounge, so we could just hang at the lounge and see people passing around and talking to them. That allowed me to meet people that I would never expect to meet. So almost all of the NA casters, you of course, a lot of the players. I think it was a very cool chance to connect, especially for me as a caster who has been in this game during the entirety of the game, like mostly online, right? Since the pandemics, etc. And after that, I still stayed online in Brazil, but now I'm here.
Right.
So it was very cool. And yes, I'm hoping for the next year. About this, do you have any hint of the place where it's gonna be, or it's just, maybe it's too soon, right? I guess they're discussing this right now on ESL.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that, to be honest, even if I knew anything, I wouldn't be allowed to tell you. So,
of course.
but, all I can say is that I'm just excited to see what happens next. I know that a lot of people in the community have been requesting for perhaps an event to happen outside of the US, which I think, part of that has to do with the issues of how there have been still players who had visa issues, unfortunately, and could not come. But, to those teams that, struggled with visas, I sympathize for you. And at the same time, I commend them for still coming through and giving their best effort, sincerely. But simultaneously, I will also note that, unfortunately, I don't think that changing continents really doesn't solves the issue completely, because of the fact that just, it just means that you still have to get visas resolved in some way or another, right? Regardless of the country that you're actually going to host the event in, to be honest, right? So, with all due respect, I'm not saying that we should host again in the United States. That's not my point. It is more so my point to say that, I think it is best that we can host in a place that, yes, would have the least amount of problems visa-wise. That would be great, but simultaneously we have to take into consideration all the other factors, such as, how many people are going to come live to the event, just like they did this year, and hopefully even more than this year. And simultaneously, the visa stuff, travel, etc., all those types of things. So there's a lot to take into consideration when it comes to this. So I would say that it isn't, out of the realm of possibility that maybe this event can be held again in the U.S., but who knows? Maybe it could be held outside of the U.S. We'll just have to see.
We have to see, and like you said, regarding the visa issues, we could see that even folks going to Brazil, even like some players try to travel to São Paulo in April to play the Snapdragon Mobile Masters. Some folks had issues, not strictly always related to the visa, but like this is always an issue. Like I post in socials, like I tell my folks. Like I tell my followers as well, the visa decision is always sovereign. It's always related to the country who's hosting the event. So it's never related to the company or the game or this or that. But like it's always very very personal. Some players didn't have what they say a strong profile to hold a tourist visa, right, in the US, but maybe that's the way the US gov sees it. So it's always relative. We can never foresee these kind of things. But let's hope, like I said, it's a place that we can have everybody all together and definitely like focused on the game. And speaking about the game now, moving towards it, which I would say it's a more interesting topic here. What did you think? How did you see elevating to the condition of a world champion? Could you see that coming, Hippo? Be honest.
Yeah,
I was dying to ask you this on the hotel lounge.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, it made a lot of sense that they managed to win. I mean, they were coming off of an incredible Cinderella run. I say Cinderella in the sense of like they came through the losers bracket, right, from CDSI, and they made an incredible run at CDSI to the point where they won. Right, and then they just showed how refined they were, especially when it came to Hardpoint, which is a very dominant mode for them, and also control. Search and Destroy was the only mode that I think everybody was, lifting an eyebrow about them, if you will, in terms of, will they be at a level where they can actually beat everybody in Search and Destroy, at least take a couple maps off, because there's a saying, I suppose, that's common in Call of Duty, which is that Search wins tournaments, right? But I think that with them, they definitely leveled up their Search and Destroy game. They understood how to play, how to patch up the weaknesses to a degree, at least, where they were able to hold their own and actually win a lot of the maps that they actually played Search on. And as a whole, I mean, they just had a very dominant run throughout champs, which was to be expected, especially through the Swiss stage. And then, as they kept on going, they were able to take down every single challenge that kind of came into their face, which is why even when I was at the caster's desk as a guest, I just threw in at the end that, I'm calling that Elevate is winning when they were facing Q9, which, I love Q9, I love Oling and everybody there. They're all great, but no offense, but I Elevate was good, without question.
So, but would you say you based your guts or your feeling on this more like in Search and Destroy, or like overall watching them, or
I think you could just tell from a number of things. I mean, for one, it's just that with all due respect, it felt like they were the ones that were the most hungry to win everything, just from how they hold themselves, But then with that hunger also comes confidence. They were never arrogant. They were never coming in with the mindset of like, we're not going to lose. It is more so like, whatever comes, we're going to, win. And which I think those are very different. Because there's a very fine line between arrogance and confidence. And for them, they were very confident in terms of, what they could do. And they knew that they have a very good game plan, especially in the hardpoint game modes. And what I think is very, I wouldn't say underrated, but I think is not discussed enough about a team like Elevate, is that if you look at, for example, even like their map pools, in terms of what maps do they consider are so weak to the point where they have to ban, right? And the other maps where they have good enough win rates and win percentages against other teams in general, and teams that have a similar playing profile and style. Theirs probably was the smallest in all of Respawn's as a whole. Like, every team had like a set, map, especially in like Control, that they definitely didn't want to play. But in Hardpoint, I would say there's only probably like maybe one map that Elevate just really does not want to play. But then every other Hardpoint map, they're like, we don't care who we face, we're going to win, pretty much. And so that made their playbook so much easier, and made it so, especially in like a best of 3 format, which is the Swiss stage, right? It makes it so easy in terms of how they do their picks and bans, because they can now not only have defensive bans, meaning bans that are going to be specifically for maps that, you know, they're worried about playing, for in terms of, oh, we are weak on this map, but they also have, you know, the freedom to make offensive bans, which are bans that are specifically targeting their opponents. And then every other map is just like, okay, we are, you know, we're starting off on a greater chance of us winning, right? They're starting off in an advantage state from the get-go on a mental side. And then when they go into the game, obviously, they are really good. They are really solid. They have undeniably faster pacing than any other team in the world. And so they just overwhelm, which nobody's been able to crack the code in terms of either slowing them down or, you know, matching them and playing at a level where they can actually, you know, beat them when they're on their A game. And so that's pretty much what it is. But I mean, champs to a certain degree is like that one tournament where you never know. In champs, like the craziest upsets can happen in champs, and the craziest things can always happen. And so, I mean, I think we saw some really interesting matchups and really interesting results happen throughout the entirety of the tournament, with certain teams. I wouldn't say necessarily getting upset, but having series that were really, really tight, and ultimately affected the course of what the entire rest of their tournament run would look like as well. So, but yeah, for Elevate, kudos to them. Kudos to all the players, and also obviously Alea, for sticking together. I mean, with the exception of Kendi, who I think was a recent addition, but even to him, you know, he went crazy throughout the tournament and throughout CDSI and throughout the season. When he joined the team, he's a valuable addition to that team. But beyond that, just kudos to all of them, and for sticking together for 4 years. You know, I still remember very, very. I still remember like yesterday when I was in Blacklist in 2022, and you know, those guys were still in something called WPM Low Kings. That was what they were known as, and they were still little kids. I think two of them, I think it was Luffy and PJ, and maybe Yopi as well, were too young. I think, if I recall correctly, they were still young talents. They were either too young or just turned of age to be able to compete for champs. And so I remember that, and like being, you know, and you know, my team playing against them a few times as well in tournament. And so it was just really funny, you know, getting to see them grow so much from that point to become the champions that they are. So I'm just really happy for them, really. And they deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of topics you brought here. I agree with a lot of you know, of the ideas you brought as well. And man, it's crazy, right? Isn't it? These guys, you know, going from the back here, I agree with you when it comes to being resilient and searching and being hungry for the game, for the win, for the game. So cool to see them flourish then. Just like other players flourished in their own regions, but like obviously, since the competitive level in some regions is not, you know, as sustainable over the year, these teams and players, they struggle to fight in a higher level, and that became very, very clear in Atlanta. But yes, for Asia, these guys have been fighting for a long time, and yeah, I was happy to see them winning. Talking about Elevate a little bit, I could you know, feel that from PJ. I talked to him last week. Last week we were here in Gamer Nation as well. So yes, you know, I would say, man, honestly, like 70% of his responses, they had like a strong psychological component, and then he talked about technicalities like at 15%, and the other percentage is just, you know, personal touch. But like, he was always starting with, hey, it's all about the humbleness, it's about the mentality. Our team was wanting to win this, and like you said, they found solutions. They were not afraid. And he was very humble, also, you know, referring to the other teams and saying, hey, it's not me, I don't mean disrespect, etc., but we fought for this. And also he said something very interesting that I will remember forever. It's like, you know, the pressure for the result has to be with your opponent. So that's what we did, and they really behaved this way, right? We could see they were not worried or like shaking or not looking at the players at the other base. So that was massively mature by them. And in a way, it was surprising for us here in the West. But I would say we were like more looking into like galleries. Talking about South Americans in Brasilia here, they were looking way maybe too much to galleries and not seeing the elevated fact growing up as a snowball like they did. And I would say many people got surprised when they rolled over the Chinese teams, because I told PJ this. I was like, man, do you realize you guys have beaten like actually 2 out of 3 teams from China? And what do you think about not playing X-Rock? Because they managed to win Q9 and also Wolves, but they did not play against X-Rock. And then PJ told me like, yeah, we're just happy to beat the team that have beaten X-Rock, which was Q9. So he was like pretty confident about that, and talking about the Chinese guys, also a very I would say conscious player, right? And very young, but very conscious.
No, 100%. I mean, those kids, they're young, but they're still effectively veterans. You know, they've been playing for a while, even when they were underage. Like, not only them, but like other younger players, like Chloe, for example, when he was part of Dunia Games, he was underage at the time. And so, you know, we have plenty of, now of age talent, that are effectively now veterans of the game. And they've been playing, and they developed an incredible amount of maturity over that period of time as they were raised very well within their teams. And I think that it's funny because that you bring up the X-Rock situation, because when I was at Atlanta, there were a lot of people that were coming up to me and talking about how like, if it was X-Rock that was facing Elevate in grand finals, then maybe things would be different. For one, I think the easiest answer to that is they lost. Which I have all the love and respect for X-Rock. Shout outs to Nono and Ma and some of the other guys, because I got to say hi to them and talk with them, and became nice friends, and they're really good kids. But they did lose, and to Q9, who played an outstanding series against them. Really, like, honestly, that series by itself, like Q9 versus X-Rock, is I think one that should be studied, and one I think that is worth remembering for everybody. It was a historic moment for Q9, and so I think that simultaneously it just goes to show the level of respect that all the Eastern teams really have for not just each other, but also for every other team that they're facing. There isn't a single one of these teams that are probably looking at these other teams that are, whether they be from the East or the West, they're just like looking at them and be like, oh, like they're free. It's like, oh, like shit, like, we're facing, these guys, who are good, like they're actually very good. And so we have to actually, play hard against them. We can't just, we can't just hold back any. And I think that that's a very important mentality to have, and something that I think is actually lacking, to be fair, in some of these other regions, to be honest with you. So I mean, a lot of commendations, in particular, obviously, for all the players from Elevate, but the rest of the East as a whole. Like, I think that the mentality that they have and the overall where they're kind of at on both a mental and also gameplay level is just on a whole other level compared to everywhere else in the world right now.
Yes, I would say so. And I'm gonna actually try to create a small a framework here when it comes to the mentalities that we had so far, from 2021. But before that, just saying hi to my friends from Brazil as well, Korostatiki and Gabriel, and everyone. Please drop your questions. Don't be shy. Okay, we're gonna cut these nice questions and contents for you all, so be with us. Thank you all so much for staying here. But Hippo, I was just mentioning a potential timeline coming from, I would say, in some moments, an overly settled confidence from the NA teams when they began to get on top. That was broken by the Chinese systems and teams when they bought, and even more precise, I would say, right, level of gameplay, collectively speaking. I guess 2023 left us with the impression of, okay, Chinese teams, they know how to play like machines. Like, it's a very precise level of combination or movements. But then now Elevate gave me a vibe as a caster of, you know, like a team that plays very well, very toughly, individually and collectively, but also is a team that is very creative, right? And it's very like flexible to like embrace the chaos. The way they play Hardpoints, to me, you know, struck me a lot, because it's like you don't give up on any points. They just break whenever, like they don't care, right? They use like the last 10 seconds, as we knew before, especially under the assault rifles meta, or I don't know, major meta. We thought, okay, you need to rotate before and count on your, you know, your line of fire that's gonna be there on the anchor. But like these guys don't care about this. That's crazy, isn't it? And it's effective. Let them to be champions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that, you know, I think we're starting to stray away from a way of playing, if you will, or I suppose a meta of a play style where controlling the map as heavily as before is less important comparative to being fixated on making sure, at least in Hardpoint, that you maintain presence and pressure on the actual objective in of itself. Because at the end of the day, right, it is true that you can have all the map control in the world, but if you aren't occupying the Hardpoint, then you lose. It's as simple as that. And
right, yeah.
What I love about what Elevate is doing is that they're putting the onus on the opponent, in the sense of it's a trap, because to simplify, this is an oversimplification really of what Elevate is doing. Because if we really want to get into the details of everything, it would take a long time. And, you know, I think Flower, shout outs to my boy, Flower provided a document that kind of breaks down to a certain degree what Elevate is doing as well. But to really just generalize and oversimplify, you know, the thought process behind Elevate's gameplay on Hardpoint is like, look, two things that you have to remember are that first is scrap points are things that will still add up, right? Yeah. So like that 10 to 15 to maybe 20 seconds of scrap time that you're giving up to your opponent by not being on there just adds to their points at the end of the day, which means that in turn that's either if your opponents already have higher points than you, then it's only widening the gap between you and them, and therefore also giving them more comfort in terms of, you know, how much they can just play for, whether it be the break or just playing just contesting and otherwise, to make it so that they aren't necessarily falling behind per se, right? It makes them so that they have a bit of a pad, if you will, that they can fall back on for a little bit. But then if they're, for example, behind, then, well, if depending on how far behind they are, if they're just like one hill or less behind, this, you know, 20 seconds is not a small amount of time. That's 20 points is massive. That makes it so that now they're like half of a hill behind. And therefore they can just, you know, start coming back from there. And so, you know, if you think about it on a mathematical perspective on that level, then this makes a lot of sense to try to play for the scrap time, especially because the standard, contextually speaking, the standard is that at 20 seconds, you give up old and you play, or even earlier than 20 seconds, like 25, 30 seconds, you give up old, you go for new, you set up your hold on new, and you're good to go, right? And you get a lot of the points from new. But then the second thing that you have to think about, and this is more important, is if you let your opponents set up, right? One of the general, I guess, generic rules that we had in the standard way that we conceptualize Hardpoint and play Hardpoint is to have someone that we would traditionally call as an anchor, if you will, where they would anchor the spawns, right? And that would be their job. The problem with this role then is that usually this role ends up being placed in a position that ends up becoming, to say the least, pointless when it comes to actually helping to apply hill pressure. So an example, a classic example of one where it is literally useless would be on Hacienda P4, or hill number 4, for those of you who don't know what P4 means. On that hill, if you have someone that is within P2 on the yellow Lambo head glitch, then that person literally cannot do anything about people that are contesting the hard point, as long as the way that people try to get inside of the hard point is by going to the inside and hugging the inside wall, or going through office and going through like the balcony, like around the top balcony of where P1 would be. They can just completely ignore this dude. And all he's doing is literally just standing there with his gun pointing towards the hill, but then not being able to do anything.
Yeah.
Right? And so what that does then is that turns it into a 4v5 of 5 people that are constantly just trying to pressure the hill, and then 4 people that are trying to do it, but then there's one person who's just useless, which forces them into a disadvantaged state in terms of being able to play for the hard point in of itself, right? But then now, that's only if you think about the anchor. Now, if you start thinking about having someone who's going to help control and apply pressure on other positions as well, like for example, maybe holding water as well on P4, then now it becomes a 3v5. So it creates a greater disadvantage state more and more as you try to play these control styles, where if Elevate, all they need to do is just, they understand like, okay, what do they like to hold? And they can either just play around it, or they can use their smokes, which they have used incredibly intelligently, along with their flashes, to just break those holds really well, like they do. Yeah. You know, like what it comes down to for Elevate is that they've mastered the art of breaking. You know, they've mastered the art of being able to play at that fast pace by using their utilities in an incredibly smart way, right? And playing, and not to mention that their mechanical skill, like if you look at how their gunfights are, it's incredibly funny, because half the time that I see them doing breaks, they don't even use their operators to break. Like half the time I've seen their breaks, maybe it's just that it's only the ones that I've seen from their POV, right, on stream. But like sometimes I just see their breaks and they have ops, but they don't use the ops for breaks. They use it for after they get the break to push everybody out and then just hold the hill.
Yeah.
And it just makes it so that they're so hard to like break back at that point. You know, like their holds seem sometimes a little chaotic, but it's actually, you know, so difficult to break when they're now the ones that have the ops and are just running over people with them, you know? And so, like, I think it's like the order, if you will, is different between how people normally think about Hardpoint, where the order is like spawns, power positions, and then going into, you know, holding, you know, having people in the objective. Whereas for them, it's like, we need to get the objective, right? And then, you know, set up cutoffs and potentially spawns, maybe, depending on the hill. You know, like it's a very different style of play. But it's an incredibly smart adjustment that they've made to how the game is being played right now, and taking advantages of like certain flaws, you know, that exist with the current, if you will, orthodox way of playing Hardpoint. And they've just really made it their own. But I will say that the precondition to why they're able to execute it at the level that they are is because of the fact that they've mastered how to break. And from that, they've also been able to learn how to hold hills very well. Both of these have to happen. If you can't both break really exceptionally, despite the fact that you have a late rotation, but then simultaneously have a very strong hold on the hill once you get on there by just constantly pressuring and constantly throwing your bodies on there and making sure that you have that presence, right? Then none of this matters, right? Like their style only can backfire, actually, if that happens. A classic example of this was, I hate to bring up my own team, but Seminole versus Stalwart in Masters in Brazil, because Stalwart tried to basically do the same thing as Elevate to a certain degree, but we punished them pretty hard in terms of how and actually beat them in terms of on Arsenal when they attempted to do this. So I think it's really just that, like, it's just a matter of understanding how to play against this play style, and Elevate just does it to a level where nobody's been able to touch them, really. Q9 got close, admittedly. Kudos to them because they got very close, actually, at Worlds on the Hacienda. I believe this game was like 250 to like Q9 got a little bit over 200 points, I think. So, good on them because it was an incredibly close match, an incredibly close, game each round, each game in the series, but not quite enough, if you will.
Definitely, yes. Yeah, I mean, so the way you described the Hardpoint, I would say it's masterful, and a lot of teams are gonna be watching the VODs and watching the games again to try to seize that in a way or the other. I created myself a reels, like trying to summarize it real quick, but I mean, what can you say during the reels on Instagram, right? You're talking about like 90 seconds. I try to summarize the idea behind their Hardpoint on like, seizing, not seizing the control of the map, but like seizing the point itself and breaking through and all. So it's a lot of interesting topics to talk about, to see on Elevate, which leads me to another complex question to you. Would you think they are a harder team or the hardest team to coach these days? Of course, all the respect to Alia, it's not leaving the post, but I mean, if you had the chance, would that be incredibly hard for you? Like trying to bring ideas to these guys? Because now they have the confidence of, seeing things work in a way that would be challenging.
Right. So you're asking, would it be hard for me to go and coach Elevate?
Yes. If you had the chance, how do you approach this kind of roster? Since they are like now synergic, since they have a philosophy behind the gameplay, they have just discovered another way of, dominating the opponents massively. Is it a harder challenge or not for a coach? I mean, strictly speaking, I know it's a tough question because we're asking in a hypothetical situation about any specific team, right?
Yeah. So what I would say is, I mean, first and foremost, if I were to go to Elevate, I would only want for it to be a partnership with Olea rather than me taking over his spot, mostly because first and foremost, the boys on that team are very comfortable with him, and I don't want to just suddenly take over his position when he's done so well with them. They're effectively like family, which I think is part of their strength as well. But then, the thing that you have to understand about the game and esports as a whole is that if you aren't evolving and progressing and moving forward in some way, then you are on the track to failure.
Right.
And I think what's a good example of this is LG of 2022, where all the players, we created this super team and they just kept on winning no matter what. And it was to this point where, they knew that in terms of talent that they were at the top of the world, right? And in terms of potential, like they were at the top of the world, to the point where it was very difficult to make them work as hard as I want them to work and focus on improving on things as much as I want them to improve. And that isn't to blame any individual player. It was a collective team issue.
Yeah.
And so, because they knew that, they were on their own, if you will, golden road, just like, Elevate was. And so for them, I think it was pretty much that, but with Elevate now, the most important thing moving forward would be to make sure to not be complacent.
Yep.
That they have to understand that they have to keep working and they have to keep improving. And as long as they have that mentality, then it's any coach's dream, really, to be able to work with a lineup that is like that. I think a good analogy to this is, unironically, in cooking, there's this whole concept of Michelin stars, right? Where, the most prestigious restaurants in the world are the ones that, are known to have 3 Michelin stars, which is the highest caliber. that you can have, because you can have no stars, 1, 2, or 3, right? What chefs, if you ask any chef that is at the top, within that small group that have 3 Michelin stars, they'll tell you that yes, it's hard to get to those 3 stars, right? But it's even harder to maintain 3 stars.
Yes.
And that's the thing. It's the same thing in this game, right? Or with any other esports. You can stay at the top. You can get to the top, right? Anyone can get to the top. But the issue is, can you stay at the top?
Oh, yeah.
That consistency is what is much more difficult to achieve. And so Elevate is now knocking at those doors. Once you become a champion, you start knocking at that door. And so now the question is, can you stay there at the top? Or will you fall? Right? So for me, if those kids have that mentality that, that they need to keep working hard to keep what they have right now, to keep that glory, then, oh yeah, for sure. Like, I think that makes it so it's much easier to work with. Like, I don't, as a team as a whole,
Yeah.
And as long as they're open to ideas for innovation and, testing things and otherwise, then I think for sure, like, it will be really interesting and really fun to be able to work with them, because that's all I'm about as a coach, innovating, coming up with new ideas, in terms of how to approach the game and how to think about the game as a whole.
Yes, totally. Which leads me to asking you, and I'm sorry for being an MG42 when it comes to dropping questions. Guys, Hippo just makes a fantastic effort of explaining himself for minutes, and then I just drop another one. I don't want it to be that way. I just got myself thinking here.
Please, come at me with everything.
It's so cool to see on you the passion, for like loving and like loving the game in different ways always, and of course improving yourself and improving your own work. And I do agree that not all teams they have the mentality of like working hardly at the same level during an entire year. That's why we didn't have so far 2 world champions repeating themselves, right? We always have been having changes on the teams and on the rosters. But I would like to ask you if you would envision now a challenge of training eventually a team in another region. And I'm asking this because my friend also, Guilherme, in our chat was like, can he train a LATAM team, please? So is it time for Hippo to go overseas? How you want to approach this question? It's open.
I'm just going to say this. I posted on Twitter saying that I will never touch an NA team again. And at the very least, what I will say is this. If I were to ever touch another team, regardless of what that team is composed of in terms of players, right? Like what? Because, for example, we see international crossovers, right? Like Vitality, where they have, where they created this like kind of mashup of NA and EU and India, right?
Yeah.
So, which is fantastic. I love that for them. Really, I think Zim. Shout outs to him and also everybody else involved in that project. Sylvia and otherwise. Absolutely phenomenal. Work that they've done to create this type of historic moment in COD Mobile esports. Really, but regardless, for me, I'm never touching a team again where they aren't put into an infrastructure that allows them to just focus on the game and put in the level of dedication that I am expecting. Because I've coached in the East before. I've coached Blacklist.
Yeah.
And, which is why for me, I love the Stalwart kids. Because 3 of them are my former players, AG, FDX, and Skirt. And so I've worked with them before, and the dynamic is very different in terms of the energy that they have, how much they care, how much more they communicate their concerns and things that they want to work on and things that they need. They're so much more proactive comparative to you know, on the other hand, and like they also, you know, if I tell them to work really hard, then they will actually work, you know, put in that time and effort, you know. But in the West, I don't think that that's the case, which I can't put all the fault on the players, because there's a difference in dynamic, right? Because in the East, the infrastructure is such that this is a full-time job. You know, they get paid for it to be enough to be a full-time job, for one, within the country that they live in. But for another, and more importantly, is that they are given the environment to do that as well. Meanwhile, in NA, for example, and perhaps EU and, you know, otherwise, here it's more like a hobby, where the cost of living and otherwise is so high that if they're not getting paid that much to play, then they don't feel like they should be putting in that much. Or rather, they can, I think is the right word to say, rather than should. And so, because they feel like they have to, you know, put food on the table, etc., and do other things in order to be able to do that, right? Which I can't fully blame them, right? Obviously, there are players that are exceptions to this, like, for example, the kids at Luminosity, you know, who put in really, really long hours and worked really hard. I mean, even in the short amount of time that I was with them to help them for stage 4 and a little bit after stage 4 as well. You know, I could tell that the dedication that they had was much greater than the, you know, other NA teams, which is part of why they were able to succeed and do so well. So shout outs to them as well. But I just don't want to be, for the lack of a better way of putting it, I think I said this the last time that I was here as well. But you know, through and through, admittedly, not so much for this World Championships, but for every team that I've been with so far, I know that I can put in 100% of myself, but with the exception of maybe Blacklist, to be honest, or 2022 LG. You know, 2023 LG was the super team and where we crumbled. Sorry, before I referenced 22 LG. That was my fault. It's 2023 LG, where everything crumbled. But in 2022, you know, back when it was Blur, Envy, Band, Washi, and like, and Solo as well, obviously. Those kids, when I pushed them along with Jesus, you know, I got what I wanted out of them. You know, they would actually give back. If I gave back, let's just say 100% of my effort, then they would give back at least, you know, 70 to 80% of what I would want out of them, which would make them, you know, and they've succeeded. But since 2023, I've become more and more demotivated, because if I give 100%, all I get back out is less than 50%. Probably 20-30% in terms of how much effort that I get reciprocated back. Yes. And it makes it so that I feel a lot more constricted and restricted in terms of how much I can do. In terms of, if I want to get into details, if I want to get into, you know, working on certain things and, you know, applying different ways of thinking about the game and playing the game and actually working on those details and, you know, voting all those details with the players, I feel like I can't do that. And I feel like I can't interfere with if there's a certain structure of how they are playing the game, you know, which is why for me, I think moving forward, it's like pretty much to a certain degree, you know, I think one of my, I think at the very least, I would like to go to the East. I would like to go back to the East in some way. But I mean, LATAM isn't out of the picture. I'll just put it that way, in the sense of, if there is a LATAM team that's willing to take me, then sure, I'll definitely consider it. But otherwise, for me, it's just, I can't bear to stand another season being tied down to a region that isn't giving a shit, simply put. I apologize for the language, but that's really the best way to put it. Like, no offense, but NA, and I it's funny because someone commented under my post when I said like, oh, like I'm never gonna go back to NA, right? Someone commented under being like, what about EU? You know? And I said, I think I responded like, never. And they responded like, why? Right?
Wow.
And well, I have nothing to say there. But if they really want a response, then they just need to watch this, because my response is very simple, which is, you know, and I said this to I was talking about this to one of my friends at Atlanta. You know, some of my friends who I grab drinks with, and I told them very simply. They were like, "What do you think the problem with EU is?" I was like, "Well, I don't know, man. Those guys.
I don't know that.
Those guys are like, you could film an entire you could just film a season of just watching EU, like Discord DMs and Discord server bashing each other and all this shit. You could just film an entire like season of that, and that alone would be like pure comedy and content of like, you know, that's like a Netflix series, like genuinely. Like, wait, they need to pull themselves together.
But I want to know about that. Why? What is that? Communication? It's lack of a plan? What is that?
No, it's called they can't, like, they just hate each other and hate on everybody and it's just like really funny to watch all that, you know, when it's funny because like they have this dichotomy of they know that they are the worst region. But then at the same time, they also like are the ones that, for lack of a better way of putting it, complain a lot and hate on each other a lot.
Gotcha.
You know, they're the most dramatic region, despite also having the least amount of success. Like, honestly, even the Japanese are more commendable, despite the fact that Japan also struggled. Has been struggling. But that said, really quickly on Japan, Diablos, you know, was a very solid team. Like I know that their record doesn't show it very well, right? That as they came in, but
it doesn't. Yeah. Like
the level of play that they showed was such that they clearly are improving, and I just want to shout out to Senmane, the coach. Along with those players, obviously, too, like they've done a fantastic job. Some of them are, I think, rookies even. But like Senmane made this really funny post about how, like, I think it was like, if he doesn't get top 8, then he's gonna embarrass himself or something along those lines. I don't remember the exact post, but he doesn't have to do that. Like, he showed, if you actually watch the series, which is something that I hate about the esports community, because the esports community, they just look at the results.
Yes.
They don't ever look at the process, as in they don't look at how did the actual gameplay go, you know? But they'll see that those Diablos kids are actually they actually play pretty well, you know, for, you know, especially for a region that is in a way potentially the most secluded to a certain extent, you know, in terms of, you know, where they're based. It makes it so that, you know, where they're based makes it so hard for them to scrim against everybody. Really anybody.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Like, they can't scrim with NA, they can't scrim with EU. Like, the ping difference is massive, you know? To the point where it's like almost unplayable, pretty much. So, you know, for them to get as far as they have, despite the disadvantages that they have, is absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and I mean that's sad for them, right? Because yes, they have been trying and since forever. Like, since I've been casting this game, I've been seeing like at least one good Japanese team. It's always one Japanese good team, right? It's always one Japanese representative getting to the finals, but then they're smashed. And yes, it's a lot to talk here. Like, I don't know if that has to do with maybe how the Chinese players, you know, are with the Japanese guys. I'm saying that because of intercultural kind of knowledge that I have from other areas, right? We know that these folks in other areas of life, they're not the most connected people or societies, but like maybe it has to do with that. I don't know Valder has to do, if it has to do also like with the lack of general higher level on the region as a whole. And I say region, I say, for example, South Korea could have a strong team, doesn't have. Other countries in the region or in South Asia could also present a better challenge or level. They do not. So yeah, I think the Japanese guys are gonna be by themselves, and as you said, we're always like so hungry for the results. I honestly never really had time or had put the effort to stop to watch their VODs. I just saw the results from CDSI especially, and they were like, low on the effort, like not getting so far away now. I don't think they even played the playoffs, right? On CDS.
No, they didn't make it to playoffs. No.
Yeah, so it's tough. But that makes a good question. Like, do you have anything on South Korea that you know, Hippo?
Why South Korea. It's funny, when I was visiting South Korea early in the year, I got to actually meet up with one of the South Korean teams called Wings. Shout out to them, by the way. They're really nice guys, really cool guys, and they have a hunger to get better at the game. And I think South Korea as a region, they've always felt left out. Because it's so funny because South Korea oddly has their own client in their own server separately.
Do they?
Yeah.
I didn't know this. Oh my. All right.
It's funny because the South Korean client, if I recall correctly, is the one that gets the first wave of updates. Like the order is something along the lines of like South Korea, then Garena, and then so it's like South Korea, China and South Korea, then Garena, and then the rest of the world.
Oh my God.
Is like how the updates go, but nobody is in the South Korean servers anymore. Like everybody in the South Korean servers have basically migrated to global, because of the fact that it's dead. Like everybody just plays on the Japanese servers now. That's in South Korea. But the thing is, obviously, South Korea isn't necessarily a competitive region in the sense of it is not a region that can qualify for Worlds, right? Which is why for them they feel really left out. In terms of they have players who are hungry to compete and they want to play and they want to learn and improve and grow, right? But they feel like, they literally have nothing. They're not even included as a region that can technically compete for Worlds. They used to be back in, the very first years of Call of Duty, which back then, funny enough, my friend Flower, who I mentioned earlier, he was a player for an org that everybody should know called T1. The org that's in League of Legends right now with Faker. T1 was in COD Mobile back then, and he was a part of T1 as a player, and now he's a coach. But South Korea was in COD Mobile for actually as a region, but then COVID struck, and then since then for some reason they're just not they're no longer a region anymore, which God knows why. I don't know why. But it's just so weird. And it sucks. But, I'm just hoping that something can happen to allow for these players to maybe at the very least try to qualify through playing in the Japanese server, through global, or maybe through their own client, within South Korea, or otherwise. I think that something like that would be great for them to be able to have that opportunity, because there certainly are the players that want to do it. It's just a matter of the fact that, unfortunately, they're not getting that support. But to a certain extent, I think, for the lack of a better way of putting it, while, yes, there are risks that have to be placed by them on their own, I think if they make the proactive effort themselves to show to Activision by whether it be creating their own small community tournaments or otherwise, to show Activision that hey, we exist and we want to compete and we're trying to grow and we want a shot, then maybe there could be change. So that's just my 2 cents.
No, but I think it makes sense. I think everything you said and told us now kind of fits in on a larger discussion that I was kind of having with folks on Twitter or X. Right after Atlanta, I took the chance of posting my ideal distribution, right, for spots on Stage 5 for 2025. And that's always an extensive discussion. and obviously each one of us are gonna have our our like small, how can I say, bias pulses, but if you, I mean, you can go into a lot of directions on that matter, and I would love to ask you your thoughts, because as for me, real quickly, I brought to a point where we could totally like take one a spot and, for example, give to a new region, either, I don't know, either Africa or somewhere else, or, but anyways, I wanna hear what you have on this.
So I think that giving a spot to Africa in some way could be cool. I don't know if deliberately giving them an independent separate spot is the best way to do this or not, because, you know, I think that there's also the possibility of doing what they did for Masters, where in Masters, if you recall, Japan and Southeast Asia, or Garena, kind of competed for a single spot, right, with each other. And so I could see that being a possible way of doing things, so as to not cause issues with regards to cutting away perhaps too many spots from regions.
Yeah.
So something that they could potentially do is maybe, you know, given geographically where Africa is, I don't know, whether it be that Africa competes with, I don't know, whether it be, I mean, what would be the closest regions, I suppose?
I mean, they have been actually screaming and playing using European signs, I guess, or signals.
Yeah, so they could
right?
do that thing where it's like EU/MENA, like Middle East.
Yeah.
And like where they could get integrated into perhaps that realm as well. And so that's a possibility. Or they could get their own independent spot, who knows? But the thing is, I think right now, it would be the easiest for them to just maybe get integrated a spot within EU, as in, like, you know, it's like, instead of just EU, it's like EU/MENA, Middle East, and also you know, Africa, which I think also would be good for EU as a region, actually, if all three were together, because that would increase the viewership to a certain degree, I think, and the player base as well, because of the fact that would make it so that, you know, there are obviously people from Africa, people from the Middle East that would also contribute to, you know, the EU viewership base and also competitive player base as well, which I think would be really great to see some of that happening, and perhaps some mixing and matching of teams as well, in terms of players, international players actually existing, instead of, you know, all the Frenchies being together and all the Spaniards being together and all the Germans being together, which is pretty much what EU is right now. But I think otherwise, you know, South Korea, as I said, I'd love to see them getting at least integrated with Japan. You know, I don't think South Korea is right now at a point where they deserve their own independent spot.
No, I agree.
I say this as a South Korean, like with the minimal knowledge that I have of the South Korean scene, but, you know, I don't think that they are large enough or developed enough to the point where they should have their own spot. But at the very least, I think it is fair to give them an ability to compete against the Japanese teams for their spot. So maybe doing something along the lines of 3 China. I definitely think 3 spots should go to Garena. At this point, you know, they deserve it, especially because they've won as well, you know. And then, you know, because of the fact that now EU would have that expansion, you know, where they would include Africa, if it did, right? This is based on what I would propose, right? It would be something along those lines of like 2 EU, right? 1 Japan still. And so that's like what? That's total so far 8 spots, right?
Yeah.
Who am I missing? LATAM and NA?
LATAM, NA, yes. Also India and China, as you know.
Yeah, so if we do 3 China, 3 Garena, so that's 6. And then 2 EU, and then 1 Japan, that's 9, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Probably 2 LATAM. And 2 for India, I suppose, as well. So then that takes us to 13, and then 3 NA, because especially if NA is the hosting region, then probably 3 NA. But also, like, one thing you have to also realize for like why 3 NA makes sense there especially if NA is the hosting region, is that they have the least amount of visa issues then, right? Because they are literally living there.
True story. True story. Yep.
Which makes it so that like if they need a substitute team to fill in that last spot because on an emergency, then there's no issues there. And so I think that given all of that, like that's probably what makes the most sense. Obviously, if the host region is different, like for example, Worlds happens in Brazil, right? Then I would argue that it's fair. Then maybe we do 2 NA and 3 LATAM instead.
Yeah, true.
Especially because LATAM had a better showing, arguably, at Worlds this year. But I think otherwise, I think this distribution is fine. Especially if we're now including the prospect of having Africa, Middle East, and also Korea getting involved by being integrated in some manner within these other regions, with like being mixed with other already pre-existing regions.
Yeah. I would say the next year's distribution needs to go into 2 directions, which combine everything you said, some thoughts that I've read also, and what I think, which will be like. Not only like spreading more the spots, but also enhancing the level of regions, and there you go with the mergings. I think the mergings are necessary now. For example, even for a region like LATAM, who historically has been like kind of okay, steady, cool, But like you look at South America, you look at LATAM, right? What is LATAM these days? It's South America and it's Brazil. So it's so specific. The niche is so clear here that to a point where you would need to expand that a little bit to make it better, even for replacements, right? I'm talking about like if you I don't know, if you have a better official presence at a region, you can obviously have like new Uruguayan, Argentinian players, stepping up and showing that they can like begin to beat the Brazilians. I don't know. I'm just saying that overall the regions need to be thought about, right? And they deserve a better thought from at this off season by our bosses.
And I also think that to a certain degree, like within each of these regions, like, so what I'll say is this, and this is me calling out those regions like NA and like LATAM. Well, not less LATAM, it's more so EU now, I think. But like NA and EU have had this terrible history where they don't take the smaller tournaments that they're given seriously at all. For example, Mobile Mayhem. They never respected it. They never took it seriously. They find every possible excuse to push back games, push back tournaments, and otherwise. Despite the fact that, we know that to a certain level, Activision actually is involved with Mobile Mayhem. But then and they actually look at it because, Mobile Mayhem rule sets have had some kind of correlation with former esports rule sets that we've seen for Worlds. But then simultaneously is like, these tournaments, sure, they're not as grand in scale as CDSI, CDM, CDFI, etc., right? Or Garena Masters. But they're still what's given to us to practice and get involved and engaged in a tournament setting, right? And there's every excuse in the book that I've heard so far about like, oh, we don't want to show our VODs, or like, oh, like I'm busy with this, or like I'm busy with that, or like all this stuff. Like, and yet NA is like begging for more tournaments and support to come in when Activision, who is watching how Mobile Mayhem is going down, sees how NA and like EU are treating this tournament, that they are also technically behind. And then, like at that point, their Activision in ESL, they're just like kind of looking at this like why? Why do we bother investing? Why do we bother giving more money?
Yeah.
No offense to NA and EU, but y'all are entitled as fuck. And that's same with LATAM to a certain degree too. Like, I mean, LATAM now has like the ROG tournaments and whatnot, right? Which is fair. Granted, I have not seen a single one of them being streamed, but that's my own fault because I haven't tried to find.
Which, by the way, I casted them all, and they have like suspended for now because COD is as it is. You see, so even the last championship we had, like, it's not active anymore.
Like you guys have, like, these regions have to understand that, like, sure, like China and otherwise, like, yes, culturally they are in a completely different standing in terms of how seriously they take the game, right? Especially because mobile esports is far more developed in those countries. right? So that's completely understandable, and I get it, right? And also in terms of salaries, and I get it in terms of all the living expenses, all that kind of stuff, right? But they're playing their own game.
Yes.
As in, they're operated by a different company that, especially given how the culture is, can do what they are doing now, right? And they also have the results at this point to prove that they deserve it. And they have the hardworking mentality and mindset to prove that they're doing it and that they're worth investing into in this way, right? They stream, they constantly play together, they do inners, they do everything on a daily basis, and they get the results to show that they're worth it. NA, since 2022, hasn't shown really that much, respectfully. Like, I say this despite the fact that I was the coach of, you know, what people considered, I suppose, the last hope of NA.
Yeah.
In 2023, getting top 4 at Worlds, top 4 at Masters in, 24 and otherwise, right? Like, in NA and EU, the mentality and the mindset that we have, and same with LATAM to a certain degree, perhaps. I don't know the LATAM players and teams enough to be able to say this about them, so forgive me if I'm wrong. But at the very least for NA and EU, you can't cut this fucking entitled bullshit. Like, genuinely. If you want more tournaments, you want more investment, you want more to happen, then you have to work for it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And you think it should be given to you when you haven't provided jack shit.
Yeah.
Respectfully.
Yes.
Like, that's all I can tell you.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's why I don't want to coach NA. I don't want to coach EU at all. It's very simple. It's because of the fact that they think that things should be given to them. No. You have to work for it. You got outworked by the East, even though they got given what they are given, which they deserve. It's as simple as that. So
Yes,
what's telling you that, like, I don't understand why these kids think otherwise. You know?
Yeah.
So that's just the way that I see it, at least. You know, to work hard, like, if you want something, then you have to earn it. And right now, NA and EU have done not much, to be honest, to earn what they think that they deserve and should be getting. Like, I get it that they're the hardest regions to live in, to make money out of, and all that stuff, right? But, and I'm probably going to make a lot of enemies for saying something like this, but even despite that, there are people who worked their butts off, like the Luminosity kids, right? Despite that, they worked their butts off to make sure that they can still come in, grind those hours, and they outperformed all the NA and EU teams. Just from that alone. You know? So, if you can't do that while those kids could, then why, and if you aren't doing it, then why, what tells you that you have a right, you know, at all, to complain about any of this? If Mobile Mayhem does come back, or any of these other smaller tournaments come back, then they should be treated with proper respect. Because that is the first step in the right direction for showing that, hey, we really want to grow. We really want to work hard and, you know, come back. You know, we want to show that the West can be redeemed. You know, that's the way that you take the correct right step, rather than
be the mindset, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the mindset, and that's what people are looking for, rather than, you know, groveling at the knees of Activision, being like, we deserve this, we need it. No, like,
yeah, I agree.
These are companies too. What we have to also realize is, like, Activision and ESL are also companies, and esports is just not in a great place right now, like, money wise. Like, the economy as a whole is shit. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah,
like, the economy
it's tough.
Is bad, but, like, esports is in particular in a bad spot, and so
Yeah.
If you're asking them to make such a big investment where they make more tournaments, like a CDM type of thing, right, which requires a lot of investment and a lot of money, right, then that means you have to show that you're worth that investment and worth that money. But if the way that you're treating even the smaller tournaments that already exist for you previously,
it's ridiculous,
is like this, then why should they feel like and they've been watching it for years, then why should they feel anything about like, oh, like, yeah, we can give you tournaments. Like, what? It's ridiculous.
I get it. Yeah, no, I mean, it's tough, because I think a lot happens because of how players and teams act, and they don't realize that, and it's also tough. It's tough to tell them this because, when you try to do that publicly, it's complicated. It's gonna be a war. It's gonna become a media war.
But like, trust me, I know that there's gonna be a shit ton of people that are gonna rattle at my ass about how oh, like, how could you say this about your own region and shit? Like, I don't give two fucks. Like, I'm just calling out things as they are. You know?
Yes.
And I will say, I know I'm saying this while despite the fact that I coached Vague, which I know he was one of those people who posted on Twitter. He posted a massive thread on massive post, on like, which included the notion of the fact that we need more tournaments in NA.
Yeah.
I will clarify by saying this, especially directly towards Vague. I agree with Vague that we need more tournaments in NA and EU and these other Western regions. I wholeheartily agree that we need more tournaments, right? Because of the fact that additional competition is an incredibly strong means to accelerate the competitiveness of a region as a whole and how strong teams can become. That is so true. We see it in, China and Garena and how that's working.
True.
So I fully, wholeheartedly agree with that notion. But I disagree with anybody who is saying that NA and EU deserve it or should be just given these things. We can't just be given these things when, if anything, all we've shown is that we don't deserve them. So that's the distinction here. We need them. We need to have these things.
Yeah.
But to say that we deserve any of it is a different issue. That is where NA and EU and LATAM need to work hard to show that we deserve it by having better mindsets in terms of how we respect tournament organizers, whether it's a small tournament or a big tournament, and actually, participating actively in these tournaments and working hard and playing properly without making some stupid excuse of why they have to push back the tournament by a fucking week because they had to go to see the fucking dentist.
Okay, but the thing is, I was just gonna like on the side and on top of everything you said. I was gonna just say that indeed, like not only on the competitive space, but the players, they have to understand that we need them as influencers, as content creators.
Exactly.
We need them as how can I say, fan bases mobilizers and fan bases shakers, because they are the ones, they are the idols, right? They're primary guys that everyone wants to see playing. So I've been saying this for the last 5 years. Guys, you have a nice gameplay, right? It's not hard or expensive to open a stream. Stream more, I get it, you have to grind, but like also, give yourself some time to bring people together to the game. And that was not done sustainably over time.
No,
I can tell. I can say
half these kids don't even have jobs. They're just sitting at home, like playing other games like Minecraft or whatever. Or like whatever the fuck that they're playing, or like Roblox and shit like that, when they could be streaming 2 hours.
They could,
Like, it doesn't even have to be a full 4 or 6 or 8 hour
no
stream session. It can
less
just
than
be
that.
even just 2 hours or even an hour each day, or every other day. It doesn't even have to be every day. As long as you have some kind of consistent schedule where you're streaming, and building your, building that base, especially because, I mean, let's be fully straight up here. Content makes more money in the long run than professional play, right? Yeah. Professional play only is there to enhance your content. And I mean, they're kind of symbiotic, to be fair, but in the long run, the professional play is going to only make your content better.
Yes.
You know, and like
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
standing as a content creator, and
Yeah.
you're standing within the community, you know, better because of the fact that you have a bit more merit and credit to your words, and it's because you've been a professional player. And so I think that any org really, and another, that's the other thing too, like orgs in the West that sign these teams probably should have somewhere in their clause that players have to stream X amount of hours per week.
I would say
something
so.
along
I
the
totally
lines,
agree.
because of the fact that that
Yeah.
only, I mean,
Yeah.
for one, that only helps the players, but for another, that also forces players to actually play, you know, and prove that they're actually playing the game, you know,
Yeah.
outside of just scripts, you know, which I think is very important for players to do.
Yeah, that's a cool spot, and I would say on the top of everything we said that yes, you have to, I mean yes, as a player you need to think about all that, right? You need to create contents, not only because of the immediate effect you're gonna have when it comes to views and all, but like on shaping the next generation of players, you're a
100%.
reference. So
Yeah.
that's other very damaging effect that comes out of players not doing their community role, let's say this way, right?
Yeah.
They have a competitive role that we get, but as I said, it's not the most profitable one, and it's not the good one for the game to grow. And we have to remember that the game is a baby yet, right? A lot has happened, but the players sometimes I think they forget, right, that they also have to help us to raise the sport here. And Call of Duty Mobile has been like suffering with that. And yes, I mean many of the guys, like some guys, even in Latin and Brazil, they have already right from the start given up on the competitive potential road. They said, all right, I'm comparing things here, I'm going just for casual. And two guys that I really love on that matter, shout out to them, are Japa Tamashiro, the biggest CodeM streamer we have in Brazil, playing and having fun, 1,000 folks always. And another guy is Kenneth. Kenneth is he was some years ago, right? You've heard of him. I mean, he quickly turned from trying to be a competitive younger player to going into being a Brazilian, streaming in international content in English, and making a lot shit ton of like viewership and all. So shout out to these guys. They have figured it out way before the day.
Yeah, 100%.
Smart guys.
But like at the end of the day, again, like pro players just need to be much more proactive about it never hurts to dive into content. It really just takes like 1 to 2 hours every day of streaming.
Yes.
Like that's really all it is, and you can play with your friends, you can play with your fellow pro players. Although granted, I will say, and this is a hot take on my end perhaps, but I think that just playing solo ranked, especially like playing and like it as long as it's fine to play solo ranked or playing ranked with your friends, but the way that you play ranked should always have an intention as well. It shouldn't just be to like fuck around and meme around. There should be something that you're actually proactively working on. You don't have to state what it is when you're starting your streams or anything like that, or have your titles be that. But you should have the mentality of like actually working on something when you're ranking. Like for example, like if you want to work on how to your routes of like whenever you're trying to play with a shotgun. Let's just say you're a shot on R9 or a KRM main, right?
Yeah.
And you have the heavy roll. Then learning how to like throw your smokes properly so that you can create the space that you need to in order to be able to make those pushes that you want to be able to make, or the different routes that you want to be able to push, the timings, all that. Like if you want to work on that, like sure, ranked is a bit different because there's a bunch of banned stuff like Molotovs and otherwise that are gonna maybe make it so that there's a little bit of, for lack of a better way of putting it, margin of error that is incredibly wide in terms of it being a little bit unrealistic to what you might see in scrims. But at the very least, you're proactively working on something that's actually going to translate over to scrims to a certain degree, right? And also eventually to tournament, which I think is a very important thing. I see way too many pros that are just playing ranked for the sake of playing ranked.
Yep.
Rather than playing ranked because like in a proactive manner. Like even if you look at like the Chinese players, they play with each other and they calm with each other. And they don't use like loadouts that are, I mean, sometimes they do, but most of the times the loadouts that they use are pretty much, competitive loadouts as well, and down the line, which I think makes it so that, they are still working. They basically build chemistry, they build a community, they build, they actually work on things in a proactive manner, which I think helps them even more. And I think that's something that we're missing a lot, within our own region. Like the only people that I see that I think are genuinely doing good ranked content are like Kings recently, and a little bit of RAF as well, who are like scrimming inners that they hold, with their viewers, where they're actually, doing custom lobbies where it's like hardpoint to, world championship rule sets and all that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
But that's just something that I think we're just massively lacking a lot, streaming, which could help drive, the viewership of the game and in general interaction within the community a lot more. But then simultaneously, just makes it so that all these pro players are not just putting in the time that they should be outside of scrims as well.
Fantastic. To wrap it up, my friend Hippo, let's take a look at the regions. I really want to ask you this because I was curious since Atlanta. And unfortunately, we didn't have time to approach that. But I think we did in a way today, but in a very straightforward way. Since Atlanta, which region has been like catching your attention? Any teams, any players, any potential growth when it comes to regions specifically? Because a lot has been said, obviously, about India because they're playing, right? But it's easier because they're on the spotlight. But yeah,
right. I mean, are like regions that I have my eye on? I mean, I think definitely, Garena in China are regions that are that I have my eye on. It would be, if I could go to either one of them, I'd be incredibly happy to be able to do so. I think LATAM still has a lot of potential. They have a lot of young talent that can grow. And same with even NA, to be honest, also has young talent that can grow. It's just that the biggest concerns that some of these regions have in the West is that they don't put in faith within the younger generation of players. Yeah. They always just kind of mix and match between the people at the top. And it's to the point where I've actually asked some of the top pro players in NA and what do you guys think of this younger player, right? Like, could they be put into the roster? Because roster mania is happening right now. And they're like,
yes,
I didn't know who they exist. It's that bad, where players don't even know who the next generation are.
Yeah.
Within
That's
these
very
Western
sad.
regions.
Yeah.
So I think that one thing that I'm really looking forward to, or at least is a hope for me, because I haven't lost hope within NA and LATAM and even EU to a certain extent. Like, there are ways to fix these regions and to put them on the right track to growth within the upcoming years. It's just that I just hope that they actually have a change in mindset as a whole. But my eyes are on Garena and China in terms of where I think is going to keep growing and where I'd like to go if I were to keep coaching. But we'll see. We'll see what the future holds.
Right. Cool. Nice. Hippo, it was a pleasure. I appreciate your time. I appreciate the conversation. I think we have talked about a lot of things and obviously giving me a lot of work to cut all these small pieces and put on socials. I'd love to do that. But it was a pleasure. And I'm hoping to be with you very soon. Again, potentially like analyzing some contents or games. It's going to be awesome as always, man.
Thank you so much for having me again. Thank you for having me back.
It was great. Have a good rest. And friends who were with us, thank you so much for staying live. And yes, keep an eye on our socials. Have a nice evening. Good to see you guys and see you soon. Bye.